Now, Executive Suite with WPRI.com reporter Ted Dorsey.
It's hard to get a better Twitter handle than @Jack. But that's one of the benefits of being Jack Dorsey, who co-founded the mega-popular social media juggernaut in 2006. These days, Twitter has more than 1 billion accounts, and Dorsey has his sights set on another industry, retail. His mobile payment startup, Square, lets small firms turn iPhones and iPads into cash registers, and it's already signed up 5,000 customers in Rhode Island. What's his advice for local leaders pondering the path to prosperity? This week, on the first half of Executive Suite, Twitter and Square co-founder Jack Dorsey. Plus, from This Is the Station That Reaches the Beaches to No School, Foster Gloucester, the rich history of Rhode Island radio chronicled in a new book. On the second half of Executive Suite, Rhode Island radio author John Rook. Welcome to Executive Suite. I'm Ted Dorsey. Last week we had the opportunity to talk with Twitter and Square founder Jack Dorsey at the Rhode Island School of Design while he was in town to give a talk about art, design, and commerce. Dorsey sat down with me to discuss how he wants to revolutionize the retail sector, why everyone should try out Twitter, and what it's like to become a billionaire. Here's our conversation. Jack, thanks for sitting down with me. Your talk at RISD today about Square is titled Designing Commerce to Feel Amazing. What will your message be to the students here?
Well, it's mainly one of the things that we love exploring at Square is the intersection between art and technology and architecture and engineering, and how that inspires trust, how it inspires people to kind of ignore the technology and really focus on what's meaningful. And what's meaningful in commerce is actually the conversation between the buyer and the seller. We've tried to minimize the burden of payments, the mechanics of payments, the fact that you have to dig out your credit card, or you have to dig out cash, or you have to fumble with the checkbook. All that should disappear in service of just facilitating this simple commerce transaction that happens every single day all around the world. So how can we use design and the process of design to help that along?
And you've said you're not a fan of the word disruption used in technology. You like a different word.
No, disruption is like an earthquake. It's moving things around. It's not necessarily moving things around with any sort of value or any sort of purpose or any sort of mission. So we prefer revolutions. Revolutions have purpose. They have values. They have a drive. They have a shared set of understanding. And they're actually trying to change something based on some friction point, or based on some wrongdoing over here to actually get to something that people feel better about. So I think the tech industry at large uses disruption a little bit too much, but disruption to us is directionless. It doesn't really have anywhere to go.
And your own message, your own story is fascinating. You didn't always plan to create big companies. You actually looked at being a massage therapist for a while. What do you think the message is there for would-be entrepreneurs who are watching this?
Don't be a massage therapist. No,
but you have that to fall back on if any of this falls apart.
Yeah, I never really thought about building companies. I had ideas and I wanted to see them in the world, and it just happened to be the case that the most efficient means of bringing an idea around the world today is a corporate structure. So I learned everything I needed to learn about building a company, and that was it. But along the way, I did many other things. I did botanical illustration, I did fashion design, I did massage therapy because I was developing RSI. So all these things were in service of me being able to bring these ideas to the world. And that would be my advice: is you have to have a drive and a passion to do whatever it takes to push your idea out into the world and make it thrive.
And let's talk about Square specifically. Seeing it used more here in Rhode Island, the Food Truck Festival, the RISD alumni sale. We're sitting here at RISD. A bakery just opened and they have an iPad with Square attached to it. How does Square work exactly for a business that's decided, all right, we're going to use Square to process our payments?
Well, what we recognized really early on was how difficult it was to just accept credit cards. You have to get a merchant account. It's a 1 week to 4 week process. It's extremely costly. And the problem is that most people have moved to paying with plastic cards. So they're paying with a debit card or a prepaid card or a gift card or a credit card, they're not carrying cash around, they're not carrying their checkbooks. So if you don't accept credit cards, you actually lose sales. So that was a simple idea, is how do we turn on that other side? How do we make it as simple as going to the App Store, downloading an application, putting in your name, us sending you a free credit card reader that plugs into your iPhone or your Android mobile phone or your iPad, and then swiping a credit card and that money going into your bank account the very next day. Can it be that simple? And the answer is yes, it can. So that is Square today. You go to the App Store, you find Square Register, you download it, you put in your name, your address, and we'll send you a free credit card reader, and you can start swiping credit cards and debit cards, and the money goes into your bank account the very next morning. So it allows you to focus on what's truly important in your business instead of having to worry about getting a merchant account or all these fees that you have to pay that don't really make any sense.
And business might be listening and thinking, well, is it for a tech business only or certain kinds of business? But you're aimed at every kind of business at almost every size. At
everyone, and that's what I love about it, is it scales from an individual all the way up to the largest organization in the world. So on the other side, we have Starbucks using it, and they're using the exact same technology that someone who is having a garage sale on Craigslist is using it for. Just accepting credit cards. We have, babysitters, we have dog walkers, we have golf instructors, piano teachers, flight instructors, food trucks, cafes. So that whole range of commerce, anything that you can imagine doing, you can imagine buying and selling, you can use Square for.
Now, I want to ask you about Twitter as well, but one more thing on Square. I saw you wrote on your Tumblr about banning the word user. Very common word in the tech world. Why did you do that?
Well, user as a term has a very long history. So initially, it actually happened around MIT, and it was a term of it's actually a derogatory term for people who were not skilled in programming. So these are just users of resources instead of creators or builders or people who were consuming these resources. So over time, it's kind of become this abstraction where a user is not necessarily a person. It's just this abstract concept. So we wanted to change from using that term in the company because we want a really concrete example of who we're building things for. And we chose the word customer, and when we focus on one side of the counter, buyer or seller, you immediately get in your head a sense of who that person is and what they might like, what they might enjoy, what they might not like, and you know how to deliver a good product to them. The word customer also indicates that there is an exchange of value, right, and that they're paying for a service. And they may not be paying a fee for the service, but they're certainly paying in time and attention. So if you use a word like customer, you immediately sort of respect that, and it raises the bar on the level of service that you're providing.
On Twitter, I use it constantly. I know my colleagues who are here talking to you today use it as well. But I also talk to a lot of people who say, I don't know if Twitter's for me. I don't have anything to tweet. What do you say when you hear things like that from people?
Well, you never know. It's really up to the interpretation, right? So I think first and foremost, it's a great way to figure out what's happening in the world. So I use it as my news. I figure out everything that's happening in the world, no matter where it is, from Twitter. Twitter is the first thing I check when I get up in the morning. It's kind of like the weather report. Is it going to be sunny? Do I need an umbrella? What's actually happening today in the world? And Twitter answers that question. When you're actually tweeting, and you don't have to tweet to actually get use out of it, you can simply bring up the application and see what's happening in the world and see the news and whatnot. Follow your favorite sports stars or celebrities or people you admire. But if you do tweet, someone will find meaning in it. And early on in the company's history, we got a lot of flack for Twitter being about what you had for breakfast. People would tweet about, well, I had bacon and eggs for breakfast, and why should anyone use that? Why is that meaningful? Why are we spending time on this? And I'm actually someone that tweets about what they have for breakfast, and to most of the world, 99.9999% of the world, it's useless, and maybe so useless it's offensive to people. But my mom loves it. She thinks it's amazing. She knows I'm eating. She knows I'm alive. She knows I'm eating well. So it's all up to the interpretation. So give it a chance. Someone will find value in what you have to say.
Rhode Island, you're here today in Rhode Island. We have the highest unemployment rate in the United States, and there's a lot of debate going on in the state about what we can do to make it a more attractive place for startups, for entrepreneurs. If state leaders asked you for your advice to create that kind of environment, anything come to mind to you?
Well, I think the biggest thing is stating that you want that, stating that you want small businesses, that you want more of them, and not just stating it, but showing it, and showing it with mentorship programs, showing it with subsidies of equipment, of space. It's one of the things we focus a lot on at Square, is because one of the big barriers to actually starting a business is getting paid. So taking that and making that easy and making that something that people can just check off the list immediately enables them to actually focus on what they want to do. We've seen a lot of folks within cities, within downtowns, take to Square and start accepting credit cards and actually build their business because they have really compelling data on what's working and what's not working. So the city shining and the government shining a spotlight on those easy paths of starting something, I think goes a far way. And then also giving other people the confidence to join and to work at a small business, that these things will last, that they are important to the economy, and they're really meaningful. So it's just taking on that attitude and really showing and not telling more than anything else.
And we're just about out of time. One last question for you. I've never had a billionaire on Executive Suite before. How much has your life changed from being so fortunate?
I only get this, only by getting this question every now and then. It's not really what drives me at all. As I said, I never started with the intention of building a company or becoming rich. I wanted to see the idea for Twitter exist in the world, because I love cities. I love knowing what's happening in the world instantly. I just think that's extremely compelling, and that's the most meaningful thing. So everything else kind of just fades away. And the same is true for Square. My mother ran a coffee store. My father has been an entrepreneur since he was a kid. He started a pizza restaurant when he was 19, and they saw all the problems of just getting started, and that's always what's driven me, is just to solve problems and actually build things so I can use them in the world, because I think they're better.
Jack, thanks very much for the time.
Thank you.
This is our interview with Jack Dorsey, co-creator of Twitter and CEO of Square. When we come back from new media to old media, a new book chronicles the rich history of Rhode Island radio. Stick with us on Executive Suite. Welcome back to Executive Suite. I'm Ted Nesi, and I'm joined now by John Rook. He's a familiar face probably to a lot of you at home, longtime local broadcaster, voice of the Friars, and author of this new book, Rhode Island Radio, which came out last fall. John, thanks for being here.
Ted, it's my pleasure.
The book is terrific. It's great fun. I was reading through it yesterday. Tons of photos, and bring back a lot of memories for people here in Rhode Island, and maybe for people a little younger, some memories you don't have, but enjoy.
That's okay. Memories need to be created. That's right.
Now, this must be a familiar place for you. You were an anchor here at we're in WPRI studio, obviously.
You have to go way back, I think, to probably figure all that out. Yeah, 88 to 91, I was in these very studios, and we were talking about before we got started today how we used to do the PC Coaches show, in particular in this studio right here. So it was a lot of fun. Great memories, great start for me, and I do miss it to an extent.
Now, but radio, you clearly have a love for radio. It comes through in the book. How'd you get interested in the AM/FM dial?
Oh, goodness. I think I've always had that interest, Ted, but the biggest interest was actually, it came about again while I was here working at WPRI, in particular at Channel 12, when I had the opportunity to become the voice of the Friars, and that sort of rekindled everything all over again. I've always loved radio from the time that I was a boy, and listening to my grandfather's old civil defense radio and St. Louis Cardinals games back in this would have been the 1960s, really, or early 1970s, because it was before I grew up in the state of Texas. This is before the Texas Rangers even existed. So the only close team that we had to listen to was the St. Louis Cardinals. So I grew up listening to Jack Buck's voice on the radio, and it just always captivated me. And I swear, if I lived a previous life, I must have lived during the Roosevelt era fireside chats, because I can just see myself hovered over the radio and the parlor and the wireless. Yeah, absolutely. With my grandparents and my sisters and brothers, and listening to the fireside chats. Or I really wished I could have been a performer during that time. because that must have been fascinating.
And you didn't have to get as dressed up too if you didn't
No,
want to. Although
no,
they seem to all the time in here.
Let me
Suits
tell you.
all the
Oh yeah, suits, ties, hats, the whole 9 yards.
And let's talk about the book. The first thing that might surprise people: the first Rhode Island radio stations weren't started by broadcasters; they were started by
department stores. Yeah, isn't that an amazing? See, that was the thing that really fascinated me about the whole research angle of this, was the fact that radio was born in this state based on the competition between the department stores that ruled the roost at the time. You had Shepherd's department store and the Outlet department store, which were the two kingpins, and Cherry and Webb, who actually at one time owned this very television station. They came in later, started it, but they came in later into the foray into media. But it was really the Shepherd brothers decided that we need, number one, we knew that radio was coming in because of it had started in Boston and in New York a few years earlier, and they said, well, we need a way to get the advantage on our competition, to sell suits, to sell housewares, and yes, to sell radio sets, both pre-assembled and unassembled, because it's the new technology, the new media at the time, and we wanted to get people into our stores to buy all this stuff. And so Shepherd Brothers went on with it and started putting their shows in the studio, and Outlet said, whoa, wait a second, we're going to get behind in all of this. Outlet brought in WJAR a month after EAN launched in 1922.
EAN, which is now PRV 790 on the AM dial. That is the first Rhode Island radio station. Different name now, different call sign now. But
AM 790 was technically the first station, although it wasn't at 790, the frequency at the time. Oh. The call letters, WEAN, actually still do exist, and they've been flipped over to 99.7 FM right now. But that's the one entity that still has the WEAN call letters.
Sliding back and forth there. We're taping this on a Wednesday, potentially big storm approaching. That always sends us broadcasters into overdrive, but it's nothing new, apparently. Radio, you talk about in here, the role it played in the Hurricane of '38. Tell us about that.
Yeah, in 1938, there won't be too many people that remember this, but it was a devastating storm, and because there was very little technology and very little protection that we've built up around us over the decades, Rhode Island was devastated. EAN was the only station, was the first station. There was only 3 at the time in Rhode Island in 1938, but it was the first station back on the air. And they basically,
were they knocked off the air?
Everybody was knocked off of the air in 1938. EAN got back on first, and they were able to run a microphone out of a second floor of a downtown office building above all of the destruction below where the flooding was, and it was because of their ability to describe on the air to people on the outside what was going on here. It actually helped the assistance to arrive at an earlier time. And they were able to use that and utilize the auspices of what was then called the Yankee Network, of which EAN was an affiliate, sharing that time with stations in Boston in particular. Through the Yankee Network, that Boston was able to send down help to Rhode Island, to help Rhode Island get back on its feet.
In many ways, not too different from what we do today when there's major breaking news. We go on live and we just do our best to explain the facts as we hear them.
Very, very true. But it was sort of antiquated, obviously, at the time, but the same principle applies today.
Now, we were talking about PRV and WEAN. I want to show an ad you have in the book. You have great photos and advertisements in here from 1961 of WEAN. And here it is. That was a robust news station. This is, again, 1961. You see they talk about having a Washington bureau, the Providence Journal, bulletin news facilities. I mean, this was a serious enterprise.
They, at one time, EAN 790 was all news all the time, kind of like WBZ is in Boston. They had tremendous resources, but then at one time, the Journal Bulletin newspaper as an entity decided that they needed to be more single-minded in their association with media, and they thought they were spread too thin. So they went back and went to their core business of newspapering and sold the television and the radio, but mostly the radio at the time off. Cap Cities, I believe, was one of the first purchasers of that particular signal at the time when they sold it off. This would have been back in the 1970s specifically, but yeah, it's the ownership groups that have come here are all heavyweights and all industry known entities throughout the country.
And if we're talking about radio in Rhode Island, we've got to talk about Salty Brine. You have a number of pictures of Salty Brine in here, one of the only broadcasters with a beach named after him. And let's show, this is Salty Brine, you say, in 1942, the year he started at WPRO, and he was there all the way till 1993, an unbelievable tenure there. I mean, where does he stand in the pantheon of Rhode Island radio?
He's right at the top, Ted, and it's appropriate photo and an appropriate person to sort of represent here, only because Salty's 50 years at one station. That will never, and let me capitalize that in, That will never happen again in this industry because people move so much, and just because of the economic aspect of the industry now, where people come and go and salaries get too high and people get let loose, it's the economic nature of the beast. What Salty did to stay at one place for that amount of time just isn't going to happen again in this industry. So that truly makes, unfortunately, truly makes it like a dinosaur. You're just not going to see this come around again. And so we celebrate Salty as much as we can, but he may be the focal point, but he's not the only person that clearly helped blaze the trail for the industry, as we're now in our 10th decade of broadcasting electronic media in this state.
And a big change you can see through the book, I was surprised how much local programming there was for many decades. You had like 9 or 10 personalities at the local stations, the community stations, West Warwick and other places, as well as long lists of people on the big stations that were going statewide. There was a ton of programming.
Oh, absolutely. In fact, everything was local. You had Yankee Network, you had Mutual Broadcasting, you had your core programming elements from NBC and later from CBS as well. But every staff, every radio station had their own personnel. They had their own jocks, they had their own news people, had their own salespeople. Everything was locally owned and operated. And unfortunately, the way the industry has progressed now, there are a lot of these community and service stations, if you will, that are really on the outs because of the cost factor involved. It's just become too expensive for smaller stations to keep paying the kind of salaries you need to keep these people moving. But Rhode Island actually has 3 of these stations still in existence to this day, 2 in Woonsocket, in WOON and WNRI, and 1 down in Newport in WADK. These full service stations really are. They have gone the way of the dinosaur. How they have not flipped over completely to satellite services to this point in time is beyond me, and it's truly a credit to the individuals who work and operate these stations to keep this local broadcasting alive. And the people who get to hear these stations every day, they're the lucky ones.
And that's a labor of love up there. I did Coffee Ann, the show Socket Radio still has a major impact on politics there. People hear things on there. They're talking about it in the city, and Coffee Ann's been on a long time.
That show has been on the air for 60 plus years. It's the longest running public affairs show of its kind in the country.
And for people outside Woonsocket, it's just a morning sort of chat program.
Staple.
Yeah.
It's a staple. You don't go out of the city of Woonsocket without listening to Coffee Ann. That's just the way it is. And I've had a chance to be on that show too. And the venerable folks that put that together, it's a tradition. They're into tradition, and that's kind of near and dear to my heart.
One question you raised that could be concerning to folks up there, who's the next generation who's going to run these full-service community radio stations?
See, that's a great question, and unfortunately we don't have an answer to that. I was speaking with Bob Angel at WADK in Newport about this, and he says his greatest fear is that we don't have a new generation to come up and take over the realm, and take over the helm rather, of handling these radio stations and take them on into, further into the new millennium as we have. Bob Angel would love to be able to step aside someday and hand this off to a newer breed, a younger breed that can help bring new media ideas and techniques to help make these local stations thrive. And I know Dave Richards at WOON would also hope to be able to do the same thing, and yet they're not sure who they're handing this off to yet. So if you're a young person and you'd really like to get into radio, I would tell you that right now is a really wonderful opportunity, if you can get to know some of these people, to get in hands-on, learn the business, and maybe cultivate something for yourself.
Yeah, you teach at Emerson, so you talk to this next generation of would-be radio stars. What do you tell? Well, I'm sure they ask you something. Does radio have a future? Am I going to get paid? What do you tell them?
Well, most of my students, Ted, will want to be Bob Costas. So, but that's a good thing. I don't mind the challenge of doing that. I tell them that the opportunity is there, and it's always going to be there because of the advent of the internet in the World Wide Web. Audio is always going to exist. It's just going to exist maybe in a little different form or fashion rather than terrestrial or commercial radio as we know and love it up and down our radio dials, or the satellite feeds that are out there. So it's never going to go away. It's just, how do you attract an audience? How do you make yourself stand out? And that's always the challenge for whether you're an old timer and you've been in the business for 20 or 30 years, or whether or not you're just getting out of school, or you're just wanting to get into the business for the first time. You've got to figure out a way to get noticed. And with everything fragmented and fractured, and in the 500 channel universe, 1,000 channel universe that we now live in, what is going to give you an edge on the next guy? And it's all about entertainment. It's all about making a name. Sometimes it's for the worse rather than for the better. You try to apply good, solid journalistic principles to everything as best as you can. You try to put a little bit of an entertainment twinge to it to make somebody say, while they're watching you for that couple of moments, or while they're listening to you for that fleet second, wow, that's interesting. I'd like to hear more.
I'll stick with that.
And yeah, and then if you can reach out and grab them and hold on to them, then you got something.
Only about 20 seconds left, but I read a portion of the proceeds from the book going to scholarships.
Yes, we are starting this year a scholarship fund for aspiring students that would like to get into radio. And for more information on that, if you want, you can go to the Rhode Island Radio Hall of Fame website at rirhof.org.
All right, well, that's all the time we have. I want to thank you, John Rook, for joining me here. You can hear him on the radio, right? Calling Friars games?
Still enough, yeah.
Where on the dial we find you?
WEI FM 103.7.
All right, so you heard it here first. And I want to thank Twitter founder Jack Dorsey for joining us in the first half. If you missed any of the show, it's all on our website, WPRI.com. I'm Ted Nisi, and stick with us this week and every week on Executive Suite. Yeah.